Yeah. Oops, SFR disappeared. I did. It's added. We're in business. Okay, so but I don't hear anything though. Oh, okay, yeah.
Hi, this is Greg Felton, author of The Host and the Parasite, How Israel's Fifth Column Consumed America. The 5 years I spent researching and writing this book taught me more about the decline and fall of the American Republic than any university education ever could. I chronicle its degeneration from a republic into a client state of Israel through 7 stages of Zionization. As a result, the U.S. has fully morphed into Israel-America, the greatest terrorist empire history has ever known. If U.S. and NATO military policies seem absurd or perverse to you, The Host and the Parasite exposes this underlying irrationality. Get your copy from moneytreepublishing.com.
You're listening to Speak Free Radio, the free speech internet radio platform.
Welcome. It's just legal realism. Now, why are we getting Okay. We're having terrible trouble with Speak Free Radio. I don't know what's going on here. Okay, maybe we're set now. Anyhow, this is Charles Lincoln from New Orleans. I am your host for Legal Realism, the Politics and Rituals of Law, joined by my regular co-host Sam Dixon from Atlanta. And second night, we're talking to Police Chief Gordon Weiberg from, I take it something like Yuma, Arizona, or something like that.
Correct.
Anyhow, we're going to continue the discussion we had last night about. Well, I kind of want to start off with something we didn't cover too much last night, which is one of the subjects of this channel. One of Speak Free Radio, sponsored by Dave Gahary, is actually produced by Dave Gahary, I should say, is actually conspiracy theories. And obviously they take some of the conspiracy theories very seriously. And I'll tell you one of the ones that I take extremely seriously, and I'd like to ask Police Chief Gordon about that. I would like to ask and start off tonight asking about the 9/11. We're today is 9/6. We're 5 days away from the anniversary. And as a police chief, what do you think of 9/11? And is our 9/11 truthers crazy tinfoil hat conspiracy theorists?
Well, firstly, I think we have to define conspiracy theory. And what we consider that to be, I think sometimes gets distorted in today's society. 9/11 actually is an important date for me. that's a date where I actually decided to change jobs because of where I was at, to better support what became known as the GWAT, the Global War on Terrorism. With any evaluation after that being taken instead, I think I will also mention that on the next anniversary of 9/11, this Monday, I'm scheduled for back surgery. That's an interesting day for me. But as far as conspiracy theorists, alleged conspiracy theorists, I just spoke with one the other day, as a matter of fact, who believes very sincerely that the attacks on the Twin Towers was a government conspiracy, that it was planned, prepared, and conducted by the United States government for who knows what reason. I've read about those conspiracy theories. There's a lot of evidence for and a lot of evidence against any of those conspiracy theories. I have friends who believe in one or the other. I'm a skeptic when it comes to such things, because I was brought up in the criminal justice system in the evidentiary section, where I believe I have to be presented with credible, verifiable evidence in order to believe something. Now, that doesn't mean that I can't have suspicions or what we used to call reasonable suspicion in law enforcement. But when it comes to 9/11, I saw what I saw by video. We could talk about airplanes crashing and who's behind that and what government is behind that. I do believe there was a government behind that. I'm not convinced it was the United States government. So I prefer to have an open mind about 9/11 and the theories around what happened that day. Perhaps someday I may see credible, verifiable evidence of one or another. But as of right now, I'm best in the camp of the skeptics, and I believe only what I saw on video. And quite frankly, even that, of course, can be challenged. So I hope that answers your question, Charles.
Sam, speaking of surgery, you had a procedure today too, didn't you? Sam? Sam? Where did Sam go? Oh my God, he checked out for a minute. I believe Sam had something today, but anyhow, that threw me. It shouldn't happen. Sam.
I'm back. Sorry.
Hi. You had a procedure today, right?
I'm sorry?
Gordon was telling us that he's got, on the anniversary of 9/11, he has a surgical procedure coming up, and you had a surgical procedure today, right?
Actually, it was yesterday. I should have told you. But anyway, it wasn't a surgical procedure. It was a heart examination or whatever. And they won't have the results until tomorrow. But
okay.
They'll be what they are.
I thought that you had said it was today.
I had said it was today. I had it wrong. Fortunately, I caught my error. They will be there on time.
Well, anyhow, what do you think about 9/11? You and I have never actually talked even once about 9/11.
Well, I think you can view it from several different ways. The conspiracy theorists, and I don't. Let me add something to what Gordon said. The establishment immediately discredits anything that is contrary to its narrative by calling it a conspiracy theory. when in reality it's more connecting the dots. And then they ridicule the Great Replacement theory, and then you, which they say is a right-wing conspiracy theory, and then you turn the page, and they themselves are gloating about the successes they're having in changing politics in places like Georgia by colonizing us with third world aliens. But anyway, I think that our people have a great, certain numbers of our people on our wavelength have a great appetite for conspiracy theories. And we have a hard enough time selling our views, which are dissident views and unpopular views, without getting into abstruse conspiracy theories. And for that reason, I really have never gotten involved in the 9/11 conspiracy theories. I have told a lot of people in my life who've been in our group, on our wavelength, that you can really afford only one eccentricity in life. You can believe that the little green men landed in Roswell, New Mexico, and the government suppressed that. You can be a champion of transgenderism, or you can be a believer that men really didn't go to the moon. There are all kinds of things. You can believe that the Holocaust didn't happen. You can believe that the races are actually different than average intelligence. And in one of those, there's a certain percentage of people who will listen to you. But when you become the guy that believes in vegetarianism and in little green men in Roswell, New Mexico, and on and on and on, you have no credibility. People just dismiss you as a nut. And it's best to focus on one thing. And what I focus on is race and ethnicity. With that in mind, I think it's going to be very hard to convince people that the U.S. government planned 9/11. I also personally not having looked at it, I don't mean to kick sand in the faces of people who have, because their knowledge is more than mine. But I instinctively doubt that this is true, because if the government did it, they certainly botched things like having the additional building fall down allegedly by demolitions. And it's just unlikely they would do this. The other thing is that 9/11, to my mind, is the first opportunity we have to speak to the ordinary American who has reasonable intelligence, to show the cost of our infatuation with Israel and our involvement in support of Israel in the Middle East. We were warned way back in the 1950s, you will remember, Charles, and my brain just went blank, but there was a Alfred Lilienthal. You'll remember Alfred Lilienthal, who wrote the books, There Goes the Middle East, and other books. He was a very prominent Jewish American, and he predicted that if we got involved supporting Israel, we would draw upon ourselves the enmity of the Arabs and the whole Muslim world. And that's exactly what has happened. And there was a huge price to be paid for that. These Arabs got back at us, and the only way they could see to get back at us. And so I think it's better to just stay with the Occam's razor and to deal with it in those terms, rather than to show that it was a complicated plot by Mossad and the CIA to stage all this explosion. I think in general, to some extent, the establishment simply waits for opportunities. The day after the 9/11 incident, the government by 8 a.m. had on the desk of every congressman and senator a new law that was as big as a telephone directory of a major city. That wasn't written by people sitting up until 4 a.m., a whole platoon of lawyers banging away on keyboards. That had obviously been prepared and was in readiness for precisely such an event. And of course, what I'm talking about is the so-called Patriot Act. And in the hysteria after the bombing and the plane crashes and the collapse and the deaths, it was impossible politically for anyone to vote against that. I think Ron Paul and maybe one or two other people voted against it, but he was howled down for just pointing out that nobody had read it. It was just given to them, and the Congress voted it through without ever reading it. So they undoubtedly have a law like that in readiness for some sort of big gun thing, where they can finally feel they have public opinion on their side, and they can try to disarm the American people. They'll have another book the size of the telephone directory that they will put on every congressman's desk. So I think to some extent they're waiting for an opportunity. They're not necessarily creating the opportunity.
Well, fair disclosure might be in order here. We are on something called Speak Free Radio, produced and founded and produced by my friend David Gahary in Crestview, Florida, and this is the mothership for conspiracy theories. And if you don't want to be associated with people who believe in literally every conspiracy theory from the moon and beyond, this is not a good place to be. I just want to warn you both. Oh my God, was that your reaction?
No, it was something that my microphone fell, but it'll be back.
I thought this was how you this was your reaction.
No.
You were on a conspiracy theory.
There are many so-called conspiracy theories that are obviously true. The theory that Franklin Roosevelt arranged Pearl Harbor, that sort of tethered goat to draw the Japs. I think that's indisputably true. So there are a lot of these things that we were told were conspiracy theories that we have learned are absolutely true. Back in the 1964 presidential election, when Goldwater was running against Lyndon Johnson, there was a guy, a rancher in Texas named J. Evetts Haley, who wrote a book called A Texan Looked at Lyndon, accusing Johnson of vote fraud and even murder. This book was widely distributed, but ridiculed in the establishment media. Now, the sort of official biography of LBJ, written by Robert Caro, it's a 3-volume set. It replicates all these things that the media was covering up, and the conspiracy theories, as they were characterized and ridiculed, that J. Evetts Haley wrote about, are all being established as completely true.
Robert Caro is a very old book. That's like 30 years old. That's not exactly cutting edge on LBJ anymore. But yeah, because Robert Caro actually talked to my grandmother while he was writing the book, because my grandmother knew Coke R. Stevens. You know who Coke R. Stevens was?
Yes, the man he defeated.
Yes. And anyhow, my grandmother was very proud to have made a footnote in Robert Caro's book. And it's LBJ, and of course the Kennedy assassination, that is another one of the mother of all conspiracy theories, I guess. And a lot of people would connect Dallas 63 with New York 2001 and say that they're, did you ever see the movie True Stories with talking heads?
No, I did not.
Did you, Chief Gordon?
I did not.
It's a very different level of seriousness from the movie that Sam was recommending to us last night, west of Memphis. It's a comic, obviously, talking heads, pop rock movie about the Texas sesquicentennial of specialness, pronounced just that way. It's basically a parody on life in suburban DFW, where I have had family and spent a good portion of my life. And all I can say is it is a truly fabulous comic relief movie. It includes a scene that inspired the creation of an actual conspiracy theory church in Dallas, which basically has a preacher singing about, you've got the CBS and the ABC, you've got Time and Newsweek, they're the same to me. And the chorus in the background is singing, puzzling evidence, puzzling evidence. And anyhow, we are on such a channel right now, and I guess I grew up with Dallas and thinking that there was something very puzzling about Dallas 63. One of the more puzzling things that ever came into my life was that you may know the name of John Tippit, the police officer who was killed. There was a little kid in my my elementary school classes in Highland Park named John Tippit, and we all understood that he was the orphaned son of this police officer. I once got on a TV show about Kennedy assassination, and I was informed in all earnestness that, according to the official story, Officer Tippit had no son. So the search for reality is very difficult. And all I can say is about 9/11, if I were a police chief, and this is part of the reason I wanted to ask Chief Gordon about it, I would have, particularly if I was the police chief of New York and I were not under specific orders to remove all the evidence from the scene of the crime as quickly as possible, I would have wanted a very careful, part of my background is in archaeology. I would have wanted a forensic archaeological analysis of the ruins of the Twin Towers, and no forensic archaeology, no forensic analysis of that colossal ruin was ever conducted. And if I were the police chief of Manhattan and I were not under orders to keep my mouth shut, I feel pretty sure I would have found that clear and convincing evidence that something big was covered up. How do you react to that, Chief Weinberg?
Well, first off, I remember that day very clearly. I remember watching on TV. At the time, I was a patrol sergeant. But if I'd been the police commissioner for the city of New York at that time, the first thing that goes through your mind is the resources that you need to marshal immediately for the first response, and then the investigation. The investigation follows the evidence. Now, with all due respect to the date is 2001, and so forensic technology, not quite as advanced as today, but still manageable. Immediately, the first thing you do is deploy a team of investigators who, once you have, and this is where it's difficult because you have rescue operations going on and you have then recovery operations going on, just as you do in Maui now, as we were talking about last night. You've got what in effect in Maui is an extended crematorium where a number of innocent people have been literally vaporized. The forensics of that is very challenging. Not much different than 9/11 with the fire and the intensity of the inferno, the initial explosions from whatever source. That's what the investigation would be able to find for you. So I agree with you that a forensic investigation from top down of that site, both buildings, and going back on the flight itineraries, in fact, as far as you would need to go nationally or internationally to conduct a full fair, and impartial investigation to get to the bottom of whatever really happened.
Well, okay. How do you feel about the 9/11 Commission? Did they make any credible attempt, or for that matter, the Warren Commission? How do you, as a police chief, how do you feel about some of these very famous investigations?
You know, I look at those as political facade. Similar to, but not as malicious as the January 6th Commission was. The Warren Commission, basically all it did was whitewash what the video could show of the assassination. The 9/11 Commission didn't do much else. Again, they're simply putting out there for the public to bring some purported closure to it, to explain to the public what they already knew. The January 6th Commission, if I can throw that out there as well, is purely a political attack apparatus to go after the political adversary of that ruling regime. So all three of them are political facades, one for different reason than the other two.
Sam, I know that you were interested in talking about Antifa and racketeering, and obviously racketeering is related to conspiracy theory. The RICO statute used by Fawny and also in this other Atlanta prosecution of Antifa, that is like legalized institutional conspiracy theory, isn't it? And I know that you wanted to talk about that.
Well, our enemies like to accuse us and characterize whatever we say as being conspiracy theory and conspiracy theorists. But they themselves have a tremendous appetite for conspiracies. You had the Robbie Kaplan lawsuit out in Charlottesville against 30-something people, most of whom didn't even know each other, claiming that there was a great conspiracy of right-wingers to go to Charlottesville and attack minority groups and liberals and violate their civil rights. You have the conspiracy theory that Trump somehow conspired with this small group of people who after his rally concluded, ended up going into the national capitol. So they want to say he's part of a conspiracy. They've got a great appetite now for conspiracy theories of their own. And the Phony Willis indictment is one of the latest of these. Some of these people are connected in the most tangential ways. As you know, under the Racketeer Influence and Corrupt Organizations Act, or RICO, you have to show predicate acts, what somebody did. And some of these predicate acts that Phony Willis and the indictment cite are things like found a telephone number for Donald Trump. This made this person part of a conspiracy. Another one is that somebody testified to a committee of either Congress or the state legislature. You're really getting on very, very thin ice when you start indicting people as part of a conspiracy for what they say in testimony at a public hearing. But anyway, that's what she's done. And we now have a conspiracy indictment against the Antifa themselves here in Atlanta, which was issued yesterday. They've indicted, I think, 61 of the people who are involved in this outrageous Antifa project called that they call Cop City, or Defend Atlanta Forest. And I've read that indictment, and unfortunately, it too is very, very poorly done. I'm surprised that the State Attorney General's office produced a work product as really flawed as that indictment. But it also has things like the predicate act for various people was that they got a check for $40 for groceries from some sort of left-wing fund, things like that. So anyway, there you have it.
The attraction of RICO and the thing that makes it such a brilliant plaintiff's tool is that any act that can be construed in furtherance of a conspiracy can be taken as a predicate act. And they're still supposed to actually say that you adopted the purpose of the conspiracy and that you consciously joined it. And in Charlottesville, they really fell down hard on that one. They basically said you didn't have, Judge Moon in Charlottesville actually said you didn't have to consciously join in anything. In Detroit,
that's really quite amazing that you can be a member of a conspiracy and not know. You can be a member of a conspiracy, have no intent of being a member of the conspiracy. That's really something.
It does open up the possibility of some very creative prosecution and lawsuits. But I mean, it basically means that everybody can be liable for everything.
Well, yeah, as I've often said, if this conspiracy theory law that was used against the defendants in Charlottesville were to be applied to our opponents, which it never will be, no prudent man would ever go to any political meeting of any sort, whatever, because if you go to the meeting and somebody else in the meeting gets in a fight with a protester outside the meeting, you can face bankruptcy and destruction by being indicted as part of a conspiracy to commit some sort of illegal act. So the effect of this, if it was applied everywhere, would be that political activity in America would cease, as it did, say, under Comrade Stalin in the 1930s. But it won't be applied to them. If anybody had ever tried to bring a conspiracy theory like this against the Students for a Democratic Society or any of the other New Left organizations that were around when I was a college student, that suit would be dismissed, as you know. It'd be dismissed within 30 days, and there'd be a big attorney's fees award issued against the people who filed the suit.
Well, what do you think is going to happen with the Antifa suit? That's basically against the left, right?
Well, I don't know what will happen. I'm very surprised. Antifa has been able to get a lot of traction in Atlanta. They've got all of these left-wing groups working together, which is quite a marvel. I was listening to National Public Radio in Atlanta last week. They have a program run by a woman named Rose Scott, who interviews people. She's Black, and virtually all of her programs, it's 5 days a week, are about supposed oppression of Black people or that kind of thing. But occasionally they have another leftist on. And they had a woman on who's involved in the abortion movement, the so-called reproductive rights movement. And this woman dropped in the course of the interview that, well, we're very involved right now in the Defend Atlanta Forest thing, and we're all involved in stopping Cop City. What is the connection between a pro-abortion group and this weird opposition to a police training academy? But they've got all kinds of groups now involved in this. And as I drive around Atlanta, I see a lot of yard signs in front of people's houses, especially in Black Atlanta. Stop Cop City, which is their derogatory name for the training facility that's being built. So anyway, I think they're going to have a hard time. I don't think Phony Willis will prosecute it. In the county next to Fulton County, DeKalb County, which includes part of the city of Atlanta, extends into DeKalb County, and that's where the police academy is being built. The district attorney there, Sherry Boston, has announced that she will not prosecute any of the Antifa terrorists. She says it's that she's opposed to it, that her constituents don't want it, and it's not their business. This is quite remarkable. You don't have to be as friendly to cops as I think I am, or as undoubtedly Gordon is, to think that when a group of a mob of people, an organization, a movement, goes down and throws 8 bombs at cops, and does $2 million worth of damage to public property, to the construction site, and on 3 separate occasions blows up 3 police cars with handheld bombs, and then is accused of shooting a police officer on another occasion. And that's just part of the story. For a district attorney to say she's not going to prosecute these people, what in the hell is she going to prosecute? Gordon, can you figure out what would it take for this district attorney to prosecute somebody if she won't prosecute people that throw bombs at cops?
Well, clearly there you've got somebody who's prioritizing their political beliefs and affiliation over their oath to, as the chief law enforcement officer for that county, to prosecute crimes occurring in her jurisdiction. That's her job, is to prosecute crimes. Now, if it's a one-way street where what we call now the two-tiered system of justice that we have, where if you're a leftist, you walk free and you're not going to be charged by her. But God help you if you're a right-winger and you commit any offense against any of those leftists, what's going to happen then? But if I could say a word about the enhancement of what we're bringing up as conspiracies into RICO. You know, RICO, which you gentlemen understand better than I do, was originally, as I understand it, an anti-mafia and anti-large gang statute that came in. Now, what the left is doing is using RICO as an enhancement to conspiracy, very, very fragilely, I would add, without the main element. I was always taught, gentlemen, the main element in almost all criminality, the major element is intent. Without intent, it's very difficult for me to commit a crime. Of course, drunk driving, involuntary manslaughter, there are some exceptions to that, but they're few and far between. Generally speaking, in order for me to commit a crime, first, that statute has to articulate that this conduct is a crime punishable by X amount of dollars and X time in prison. Not every statute violation is a crime. That's something the public has trouble grasping sometimes. Simply violating a statute does not make it a crime. But if it's articulated that this conduct is a crime, then in almost all crimes, I would say 99% of criminal statutes, there are, through their manual of criminal procedure, there will be elements that have to be met. And the primary element that's common to all of those crimes, in particular conspiracy, is intent. How can I conspire to commit a crime if I don't know that I'm conspiring to commit that crime?
Well, I agree with you, but that's not what they said the law was in Charlottesville, which has now, I think, created problems with them, because what they wanted was a judgment that would be bankruptcy proof, because you can't bankrupt against an intentional act. But because the court in the case in the trial court instructed the jury that you don't have to have any intent to be liable, this has opened up a potential way to say that it was an unintentional act, and therefore you should be able to bankrupt against this colossal judgment that they won. But yeah, intent is, you have to have the act and the intent. That's classical criminal law. There is a charge that the intent can be inferred from the act, and but in this case, the thing is that this conspiracy suit in Charlottesville is the work of if it were not the work of a conniving set of liars, it would be the work of a paranoid.
And how would you compare that then with the indictments against Trump?
Yeah.
I mean, is that the work of a paranoid, or that's not the work of a paranoid?
No, they know what they're doing. They know what they're doing.
Gordon, what do you think about the indictments? Have you studied those?
I have to an extent, while I could stomach them. My full disclaimer, I am a Trump supporter. I'll put that right out there. But from a criminal indictment standpoint, looking at the conduct, again, the intent, what conduct there was, firstly, I would submit that all of those indictments, all of the charges are clearly, blatantly politically motivated to damage the political adversary of the ruling regime and hopefully ensure in their mind that he's unable to run for president. Now they're even talking about trying to invoke the 14th Amendment, calling on, of course, January 6th as an insurrection, and that he incited the insurrection and therefore should be disqualified as a candidate for president. All of that is clearly politically motivated. Now they've even found that the White House met with aides for the prosecutor in Washington, the special counsel. Clearly, he's acting with guidance from the administration. They're going to find that. I would submit that here, that it's purely political sabotage, just as Hillary Clinton brought opposition research to a new level when she commissioned, her campaign commissioned and supervised the production of the dossier, the infamous now dossier that alleged a very prolific pattern of crimes and unethical conduct and immoral behavior by then, before becoming President, Donald Trump. All of that, again, goes to the left, which is free to attack the right whenever and however it wants. But by golly, if the right does anything against the left, then immediately you're pounced upon by whatever weaponization of the justice system they're able to marshal at that time.
When you were police chief, did you ever have a political case?
You know, that's interesting because I was, through my career, several times ostracized and attacked by other police officers because I believed in treating everybody the same, regardless of who and what they were. I can remember when I became a police chief for the first time, about my third night, I got a call at 3 o'clock in the morning from my night sergeant who stopped for drunk driving an individual who claimed to be my friend. And the sergeant asked me, what did I want him to do? Now, of course, that's the first test of a rookie police chief. And my answer was, I want you to treat him the same way that you would treat anybody that you stop for drunk driving. He should not be treated any better, and he should not be treated any worse than anybody else. You do what you feel you have to do in that situation. Now, it ended up that person not only said he was a friend of mine, but was a city council member for a neighboring jurisdiction, not for mine, but a neighboring jurisdiction. I got a little bit of flack for that, but I probably got some lax on it because I was the new chief and they hadn't yet, got me indoctrinated. But I was known as apolitical as a police chief. I simply had my oath to the national constitution, to the state, and to the city to enforce the law to the best of my ability and treating everybody in a very diverse community the same. So that's the closest that I can say, Charles, that I've come to a political situation as a police chief, because I was pretty successful in escaping that particular puddle most of the time in my travels.
And what city was this again? I forgot. I'm sorry. I should remember this.
I began my first job as a police chief was for the city of Snohomish, Washington, which is just north of Seattle. And then my second and final job as police chief was at Schofield Barracks on Oahu in Hawaii.
So these are both basically very small towns.
Snohomish handled a population of about 10,000. Schofield Barracks handled a population pretty close to 100,000, about 98,000 soldiers and dependents on 26 different locations on Oahu and the Big Island.
Moderate sized town. I mean, I know Snohomish only because I used to, when I was married, my wife and I used to go to the Wagner festivals they used to have in Seattle, and that's interesting. I mean, I wonder if it's possible, Sam. I mean, do you think it would be possible to have an apolitical police chief of either Manhattan or even Atlanta?
No. The answer is one answer, no, it would not be possible.
Okay, so how do we exercise ethical control in Atlanta, Boston, Chicago, Dallas?
It can't. It simply can't be done. This is one of the problems we have. You and Gordon both, I think, you have described yourself as constitutionalists. And one of the problems we have with constitutional government in America is the taproot, it's the general population. In order for a constitution to work, you have to have a fairly high intelligent level population of principled people for whom the Constitution is the most important law. You have to have people that if they see the right of freedom of speech of a person with whom they maybe strongly disagree, will say, well, wait a minute, the first principle is that guy has a right of freedom of speech, and I'm not putting up with this. I'm going to vote against you because you violated that guy's freedom of speech. And almost nobody in America is like that now. The population largely looks with favor upon political prosecutions, depending on what side of what faction they belong to. And I know almost no one who really genuinely cares about things like the Bill of Rights. It's all a matter of what benefits me and what benefits my faction. So, for political ideas to live, this is something that a lot of very intelligent people who are into philosophy don't realize. Any idea has to be taken out of the ethersphere and put into the practical facts on the ground. States' rights, for instance. States' rights can only exist when people feel a strong identification as a Virginian, a South Carolinian, a Rhode Islander. And that ended with the mass immigration starting in the 1840s in America. That's why when you had this huge German and Italian population, they didn't come here to go to Illinois. They came here to go to America, and talk about states' rights to them, it was just meaningless because they had no identity as an Illinoisian, or whatever they call people, Illinoisian. And so you have to put these things into a real life situation. And the fact in America today is that virtually no one puts the Constitution first. Everybody puts his faction first. Am I wrong on that?
Well, Charles, if I may, um, I agree with what you said, Sam. Um, I think it's a very sad commentary on the state of democracy or the republic in America when very few people are conversant in the Constitution. I used to teach constitutional law at the college level to police officers primarily, and even with some attorneys in there who needed a refresher on essentially the Bill of Rights. People talk all the time about the Constitution and the Bill of Rights as though they're two separate documents. They don't understand the ideology of it, nor do they understand what the amendments are and why, in the case of freedom of speech, it's the First Amendment. Why the founding fathers saw that as so important that it was the First Amendment. And right on up the line, all of the amendments were direct and really not retaliatory, but in direct response or reaction to the oppressive regime that they had under the king at that time in colonial America. All of the amendments up until present day are a reaction to something that the oppressive regime for that time in the 1750s, 60s, and 70s, up until the time of the Revolutionary War, that occurred from the king's regime. People don't understand that ideology. They don't understand the heritage, if you will, of our founding documents, the importance of those, the Declaration of Independence. Who wrote that? Why did he write that? Why was the Constitution written? What's in the Constitution? It's interesting, and sometimes you'll see the street interviews that certain journalists will do. They'll grab somebody off the street and ask them something. Who's the president right now? Who was the third president? Who was the first president? Who won the Civil War? And you come up with such absurd answers. Honest to God, they had one where they said, well, who won the Civil War? The British. Or who's the current president? Oprah Winfrey. There's all kinds of, and these people aren't joking. They're serious. The level of conversant intelligence today, the intellectuals among us in the public, is very, very small. The level of knowledge in the Constitution, I don't know what they're teaching in the schools anymore. When I grew up, we learned the Constitution and the amendments. Apparently that stopped sometime later because now people don't understand that. And I think, to your point, Sam, and I agree with you that people don't abide by it. People don't understand it, but they don't know about it because they're not being taught the Constitution. In fact, my podcast series is beginning a level now of introspection into each of the amendments of the Constitution, simply with the intent, there's that word again, with the intent of educating people who otherwise have no knowledge of what we're talking about as a founding document. I think it's criminal that our society doesn't know that and hasn't been taught that.
I don't think they want to know it. I don't think it would do much good if you did teach them, because what they want to do is they want to win. And I think politics in America has degenerated to the level of a crude football game. And if the umpire calls a foul against the team that the fan likes, he boos the umpire. And that if the Constitution represents an impediment to the party that someone is supporting, They don't like the Constitution, and they want to hear about it. And they also is the complete lack of any historical context. One of the bad things about the American Revolution is they cut us off from our British heritage. The Bill of Rights largely comes from the Declaration of Right that the English Parliament passed in 1692 in reaction to the long drawn out conflict with the Stuart dynasty. And they forced the new king to sign that. And it's not something that Madison or Jefferson came up with from studying philosophy books in their libraries at their plantation houses. It comes directly out of our history, but people have forgotten all that, and they don't want to hear it either. They get very angry. You hear every January, every February about Abraham Lincoln, what a great guy he was, and every 4th of July you hear about what an awful person King George III was, and common sense. It doesn't take a lot of knowledge to think about it and realize Abraham Lincoln burned whole cities to the ground. Burning in Atlanta, where I am right now, he burned the whole city. He burned the hospitals. He had the sick taken out of the hospitals and thrown on the ground. He burned the surgical instruments. He burned the drugs. He had a blockade against the whole South, but not even allow medicine in. He wouldn't allow medicine to be sent to northern prisoners of war because he wanted to force the South to have to use what little medical resources it had to try to take care of northern prisoners. George III never did any of that. George III never burned a town down. He never burned a hospital. He never threw the sick on the ground. And yet we're told what a terrible person he was because they want to indoctrinate us into these democratic ideas and to the presumption that monarchy is always evil. I think, in fact, monarchy is a pretty good system. I don't believe in divine right monarchs, and I know you can get a lot of rotten ones, but when you compare to what we've got here with the kind of people who get elected, I used to tell people when Queen Elizabeth was alive, I'm not so much sure about Charles, that I'd rather be ruled by Queen Elizabeth than any president I've ever known in my lifetime.
I think Sam and I very, very much agree on the mythology of the American Revolution, that up to a point, we had some genuine gripes. I think that the heart of it all was taxation without representation, and my cry for the first British, what's sometimes called the first British Empire, is that they didn't listen to that one slogan, taxation without representation is tyranny, and said, hey, this actually, they've got a point. They're a bunch of English people with names like Washington and Lincoln and Jefferson, Dixon over there. And why shouldn't they be voting and sending representatives to Parliament here in London? And, given 18th century transportation, okay, yeah, it takes a couple of weeks to cross the Atlantic. But guess what? It took a couple of weeks. It wasn't just an easy trip from the Outer Hebrides in Scotland to London either. So it would have made a great deal of sense if the empire had been preserved. And of course, one interesting thing about the constant concept of constitutional government is that the Stuarts really promulgated this whole concept of constitutional government. It kind of came out of Queen Elizabeth I, Gloriana, the Acts of Settlement, the Acts of Establishment, and ironically, the integration of the Church of England with the Parliament, and the replacement of the Queen as the head of the Church. But the English never wrote down their constitution, and so de facto, the Constitution of England is a living document. And this is a debate we get in law all the time. Is the Constitution a living document? Well, to the degree that Sam is correct that it was born in England, the American Constitution was born in England, it probably should have been a living.
The Bill of Rights was born in England. The Constitution was not born in England. The Bill of Rights, which is part of the Constitution and was adopted after the Constitution, the Bill of Rights is the direct descendant of the Declaration of Rights.
Well, okay. Let me just throw in a bit of my own personal eccentric background here. What's the equivalent of the House of Lords as it existed in the 1780s in the American Constitution?
The U.S. Senate.
Except that the House of Lords had a major function as what?
Court?
The Supreme Court of the land.
Mm-hmm.
And the House of Lords remained the Supreme Court of England until the Judiciary Act of, I believe, 2005, when England, trying to integrate itself with the European community, abolished the House of Lords as a court and replaced it with a Supreme Court. And I think it was a terrible tragedy for the English for the English legal system, because basically, I think that our divergence from that was another one of the early problems. Marbury v. Madison taught, torture. Every first-year law student is, required to suffer through weeks of Marbury v. Madison, establishing the right for constitutional review, which originally was supposed to belong to the Senate and as the House of Lords. And if you think about it, if the Senate had been given the right to review the constitutionality, we would have very much a living constitution, wouldn't we?
Yes, but I think the thing here again is that you have to look to the people. A paper constitution means nothing if you have a people, a population that does not care about the principles of the Constitution. The Soviet Union had a beautiful constitution. Franklin Roosevelt read it to the American people in one of his fireside chats. He read the guarantee of freedom of religion 2 weeks after he had been informed by the American embassy in Moscow that the Soviets had murdered 200,000 clergymen. But he was shall we say, a bit ethically challenged as a leader. But the reality is the people. And one thing is, when you read English history and literature, as you have, I know, one of the startling things is how much the average person in England knew in the 9th century, 11th century, 13th century, 15th century, 17th century, 18th century. How much they knew about the common law and what the law would allow the king to do and what the law would not allow the king to do. And in our society, as Gordon is saying, they don't know the Bill of Rights from a bill of sale. They don't have any idea what the Bill of Rights is. And so we've really run things down. Your idea, which I don't like, is being tantamount to mob rule of having the jurors run everything instead of the judges. Does have some deep taproots in our Anglo-Saxon heritage. Now where was I going? Oh, people forget that in Great Britain there were no police departments down to about 1830. It was Prime Minister Peel that proposed the creation of the first police departments in Britain, and this was widely opposed. A lot of people in the Parliament, and the House of Commons, and the House of Lords felt this was a sign of degeneracy. There was one especially effective speech in the House of Lords in which the Speaker inquired, "Are there no red-blooded Englishmen left to enforce the law?" Because up until then, the people were the ones who apprehended a criminal. If somebody broke into a shop and beat up the clerk and stole the cash, the cash from the cash bag, the people would grab the person and haul him off to the sheriff. And it was only it was less than 200 years ago that we actually had police departments created in the English-speaking world. So, but those people were very aware of the law, and they were very much involved in the law. And that's not true in our society. In medieval England, 1 out of every 10 males would serve in government in some capacity. Would be an alderman, a member of parliament, a sheriff. They had many, many different offices. And 10% of the male population in the course of their lives would serve as officials of the government. And now you have this scum that's floated to the top, like Rubio and who are all these people? The one from the one that's mentally deficient, from Fetterman. You got all of that element. They run everything. The average person has no role in government.
Well, I think. Go ahead, Charles.
I was going to say, Chief Gordon. This is. I wanted your. I guess I'd just like to add to the question. Where do you think this discussion fits in between police, militia, and citizens' arrest, for instance?
Well, I have always been pretty adamant as an opponent to citizens' arrest. But that's more of an individual and personal safety issue than anything else. I agree with Sam. I mean, the history, especially in Britain, is of people in the shires. You had the shireve, the sheriff, that they would bring someone, and someone who was basically cooperative because they had been caught, to the sheriff. But to be fair, the numbers of the population were far less back then. We're talking 300 plus million people now in the United States, and 50 right now, going on 51 different states, all of which have different statutes and different constitutions. I think it's easy for people to get confused. It's easy for people to be ignorant in today's world because they have so much going on in their life that the time that they have, with advanced technology that we have today, we had been told when we were younger that all of the technology that we have now around us, and I'm surrounded by it here in my capsule, would someday make it much easier for us to recreate. We'd have more time. We would be able to think about things more, and we'd be able to slow down. Well, of course, that hasn't happened. If anything, the technology has made our lives more
frenetic.
Well, yeah, exactly. Frenetic is a good word for it. Absolutely frenetic. And where we're now trying to do 100 different things at once, whereas 30 years ago, I only tried to do 25 things at once. Where does this all fit in, Charles, as you ask, with the police and militia and citizens' arrest? Constitutionality is very difficult with a population our size, where people are not only not conversant in what that Constitution says, but they're not even aware of it. They're barely aware of what a statute is or what their ruling regime is. All they're really thinking about is, if I'm in trouble for something, what am I in trouble for? And I need an attorney. In order to get an attorney, I need money, generally speaking. So I think the focus for most people isn't on for example, Cop City, in the new training center there in Atlanta. Most people probably don't give it a passing thought one way or another. Vis-a-vis Kitty Genovese in New York City, where everybody and their brother looked out as she is being raped and killed on the street in Manhattan, I believe it was. and nobody did anything. Barely anybody even called the police afterwards. I think that's an epidemic in today's society, and at least in this country, maybe worldwide, where people don't want to get involved. They're ignorant, but deliberately and prolifically ignorant of what they want to be ignorant of. It's what we used to call as selective indifference.
Well, Gordon, I'm just curious. One of Sam and my favorite topics to talk about is the McMichael case. How do you feel about the McMichael case? How is your analysis of what happened there? You said you were against citizens' arrest, and
Correct.
the state of Georgia obviously ended up punishing a citizen's arrest fairly severely.
I'm not familiar with the McMichael case.
Oh, I don't know how you missed it. Sam, educate our friend here.
Well, I'm not surprised he doesn't know, because it is a Georgia case and he lives 1,000+ miles away. But the Ahmaud Arbery was a black man who was killed in the course of a fight with a young white man named McMichaels. I forget his first name. But the McMichaels lived in a white neighborhood. There was a house being renovated next door to their house, which had been repeatedly burgled. The picture of Ahmaud Arbery as entering the house had been picked up on the usual surveillance equipment there. And the police had gone door to door through the neighborhood, showing the picture and asking if anyone knew this person. So the McMichaels had seen this guy's face as a suspected burglar. Well, he came back to the neighborhood. He went into this construction house. Supposedly, the government said that he went there to have a drink of water. Well, he'd been there repeatedly, and that's pretty hard to believe that anybody would think that he had a right to walk into somebody else's house and get a drink of water. But anyway, they saw him running away, and they got in their truck and pursued him, and they caught up with him, and they said, "We've called the police. Wait till the police get here." And he ignored them, and he ran faster. I think, as somebody who's more sympathetic to McMichaels, that's pretty clear. He was trying to get the hell out of the place before the police could come, and finally interview the guy whose face was in these surveillance cameras, entering this house repeatedly where the burglaries had taken place, the construction site. But anyway, he ran. They pursued him in the car. They kept asking him to stop, and he wouldn't stop. And then he managed to elude them by darting down a driveway or side street. They stopped their car to wait for the police, and he came out of a side street and attacked the young McMichaels guy, the son, who had gotten out of the truck and was standing there with his gun. When you look at the video, McMichael never points his gun at Ahmaud Arbery. He allows Ahmaud Arbery to run all the way up to him and grab the gun and try to wrest the gun away from his arms. And they then fight over possession of the gun, and they fall down, so they're not in the video. In the course of whatever happened on the ground when they were fighting, Arbery got shot and killed. And Arbery was black, and the McMichaels were white. And it all went from there. And the judge, who seemed to be extraordinarily sympathetic to the prosecution, ruled that they had no right of self-defense, that they're pursuing this guy running away and asking him to stop until the police got there. This constituted a kidnapping because they forced him to alter the direction of his running. And since they were committing the felony of kidnapping, they had no right to self-defense, and that McMichael was required by the law to just stand there, let Arbery take his gun away and kill him. That's the state of law in Georgia.
Well, here's a little bit more political context, of course, that you skipped there, and which is that the initial investigation in Georgia led to exactly nothing, as I recall, for like 60 days or something like that, 90 days.
I mean, it's worse than you think. the district attorney in that county was a woman named Jacqueline Johnson. One of the McMichaels had worked in her office as a police investigator.
Dad, right?
In 4 days after the shooting, she recused herself quite properly and said, "Yeah, I can't handle this investigation because I know this guy and he used to work for me." And it was then sent to the way it works in Georgia is that it was sent to the district attorney of an adjoining county, who also reviewed it and felt that the McMichaels had acted in self-defense and declined to indict them. At that point, our governor and our state attorney general, both Republicans, both eager for approval from the Georgia's liberal media, had a press conference. And they said that it was obvious that Arbery had been murdered and that these white guys had simply killed him because he was a black jogger in their neighborhood. And that the video, which a neighbor had taken, that this video showed these white guys just gunning Arbery down. That is not true. But of course, it helped taint the jury pool. And the media has used that ever since. I listened to National Public Radio almost every day. And for all the time leading up to the trial, every day they had an announcement, of a public service announcement by some guy for some cause, who claimed that the video had shown the McMichaels gunning down an innocent jogger. It's just not true. And obviously the governor and the attorney general knew it wasn't true, but that didn't matter to them. They were trying to get reelected and they were scared of Stacey Abrams. And so they wanted to try to show their sympathy. So not only did they do that, they got the state level, they overruled the local DAs and had them indicted. They then prosecuted the district attorney in that county who because she had taken 4 days to recuse herself. Well, Gordon, you have a lifetime of experience in law enforcement. I have a little bit as a lawyer, and we both have common sense to know how things work. I'm amazed she was able to do that in 4 days. You know, you have to have the incident report. It's got to go into the police, have to write it up. It has to be sent to the district attorney. She has to read the thing. She has to write everything. And she isn't just sitting there twiddling her thumbs, waiting for that one document to come in. She's got trials to attend to, meetings with defense counsel to try to negotiate pleas, interviews with witnesses and cops. But anyway, that's how outrageous it was. And then when they finally indicted her, they added to the thing that she waited 4 days, that she didn't immediately put the McMichaels in jail and hold them there because she didn't care about the feelings of Arbery's mother. And then the Black Lives Matter crowd and the leftist crowd and the Georgia media and elsewhere took up a battle cry that the citizens arrest law was passed in Georgia by white racist legislature for the purpose of empowering white people to arrest black people. And that's utterly untrue. It was true, it was passed by an all-white legislature, but they simply codified the common law of England. And at the time but Kemp took up this, our governor, the Republican governor, took up the cry and announced that he was going to repeal the citizens arrest law because it's a racist law intended to empower white racists to persecute black people. And he was able to get enough Republicans to vote with the Democrats that we no longer have a citizens arrest law. You know, we have to let them run away. You cannot detain them. And when he said this preposterous claim, echoing the media and the extreme left, I looked up online. At that point, 48 states in the United States had citizens arrest laws, including all 6 states in New England. But, you know, nothing matters today. It's just hysteria. You know, you get these hysteria campaigns going about George Floyd or the Ahmaud Arbery killing. And there just seems to be no stopping them.
Well, and you invoked the name of George Floyd, which is close to my heart, of course, that situation. But essentially, that began an epidemic of hysteria, really, to your point, that is purely piled on as a racial layer of everything that is done or intended. In fact, that even goes back where we were talking about the elements of a crime and intent, is that what Brian Kemp and those did there after that conduct had already been considered and declined for prosecution. At that point, of course, under the law, it should be done. But politics intervened at a higher level. And now it's no longer, to me, a legal process. Now it's a political process. And at that point, with the race card having been played and it's purely racial, a white man shot a black man, oh my God. And of course, Black Lives Matter, which gets away from their bank coffers for a moment that they've gotten from all of their donations and begins to then demonstrate against what really is in George Floyd's condition. In fact, that situation, what really is not a homicide, not a murder. And I'm probably branding myself by saying that publicly. But anybody who watched that video, who was there, who saw what happened, saw what 4 Minneapolis police officers did and didn't do. And of course, the video didn't show beforehand where they had George Floyd in the police car and he asked to come out of the police car, and they made the mistake, I believe, of taking him out of the police car at the scene. And at that point, it went south. Even watching just the video, nobody in their right mind, in my mind, who would take the founding principles of fairness and impartiality. You know, that's what our country really, our Constitution was founded on, was fairness and impartiality. None of that was invoked during that trial. Those people now are in prison. Police officers lost their careers and are in prison because one of their prisoners, unfortunately for everybody, succumbed to a toxic chemical intoxication that he had ingested prior to that while he was on the ground. Now, that's unfortunate. I feel for his family. I feel for him. That should never have happened. But it's not the police officer's fault, in my opinion.
And yet the world has basically a near consensus from, well, I don't know, South Africa to northern Sweden, that is contrary. I mean, how is that happening? How is the world coming to these conclusions?
Well, there are several reasons. One is that the media is absolutely in lockstep to the most amazing degree in this country and around the so-called free world. There is no dissent in the media. And so they're all talking in one voice, and they talk all day long, 365 days a year. And the politicians know that, and all of them are terrified of the media. And there are other reasons too. There's a practical reason, and that is they had that part of the video with the officer. His name, I think, was Chauvin or Chauvin. It should be in French.
He's the chief defendant.
Yeah. Anyway, he was a police officer, and he had his knee on Floyd's neck, and Floyd was saying, "I can't breathe." Now, if you look at the whole video, as Gordon said, you see that from the very get-go, Floyd was saying, "I can't breathe," which is a symptom of this type of drug overdose he may have been suffering. But the picture was horrifying. And if you didn't know any of that, and you know, and especially I'm sure if you were black, and you see this image of a white man with his knee on the neck of a black man who's begging to be allowed to breathe, that has an enormous impact. And there's a practical lesson for us in this movement, which it came slowly to me, because I like words. Like I know that Charles Lincoln likes words and this kind of long thought out reasoning. The old saying, "A picture is worth 1,000 words," is a very true statement. Our minds retain pictures. They do not retain. Our minds do not retain words. We can look at remember in childhood, there was a picture of the 10 Commandments on the wall of the Sunday school class. You can remember that picture, what it looked like, and the little angels they had surrounding it, and so forth. You might not have made commandments. You can remember the picture. The liberal left is very clever and skilled at using pictures like this in lieu of thinking. There was no statistical support for the claims of the Black Lives Matter movement and the media that there is an epidemic of white cops killing blacks. The statistical evidence is completely contrary to that. Cops, black and white, are more likely to shoot a white suspect than a black suspect. They're bending over backwards because they're afraid, and they give blacks the benefit of a doubt and a break they don't give to white suspects. But the facts meant nothing. The picture meant everything. The picture, coupled with the ideology and the practical political needs of an American political structure and ruling class that hates America and hates the white people in America, and is conducting a campaign basically to destroy the typical American and to destroy the American system.
Well, if I may, I agree wholeheartedly with what you're saying, Sam, is that, there are people right now who believe that the current administration, the liberal left, is out to destroy America. I think that needs some clarification. Is what they're really out to destroy is the America as we have known it. That the United States of 2040 will be a far different place, may not even exist, if the liberal left gets their way. They have deliberately, for example, right in my backyard, opened up the southern border. And let me be clear, whatever you're told from the media, the southern border is open. It is wide open. And the Border Patrol is doing everything they can. And there are thousands of illegal aliens. I don't call them undocumented citizens. They are illegal aliens. They are aliens from another country who are illegally crossing the border, some of them for the second, third, fourth, and multiple times because they have been caught committing crimes in the past, some of them very egregious crimes such as murder and rape, criminal sexual assault, all kinds of things, and been deported previously and have turned right around and re-entered the country again illegally. But the problem is that the current administration, the liberal left, not only has allowed that, but encouraged that and caused that to happen. Under the previous administration, under Donald Trump, the border was pretty tight. Sure, you still had some incursions, which is why he was building the wall at the time, but we didn't have it officially open. Now, everybody from the president on down, and especially the director of Homeland Security, says, oh, of course the border's closed. We have a closed border. We put national security first. Balderdash. That is not true. All you have to do is look at the facts. And the facts are quite different than what you hear from the media. The media has positioned itself, and I think unfortunately for the democracy, the media has positioned itself on the far left, supporting the liberal left and whatever they are doing to persecute the right, which is personified now in the character of Donald Trump and his supporters, several hundred of which are, I understand, still being held without any trial or cash bond in Washington, D.C. after January 6th. And we now know, of course, of at least 100 individuals from January 6th who have been sentenced to prison sentences in excess of 10 years. Some for 33 years in prison for nonviolent acts of, by video, being invited into the Capitol, having the Capitol Police open the doors, welcoming them in fact, pointing which way to go into the Capitol. Those people are being imprisoned by our government for years and years, more than murderers are imprisoned for. And I'm sorry if I get a little impassioned about that, but that is not what the United States was founded upon, and that is not a foundation of fairness and impartiality.
It's really interesting to hear a former police chief saying all this, is all I can say. And it's good. It makes me feel good. Of course, the bad part is nothing's going to change. How can we make it change?
We don't have to make it change. It will change because the system is destroying itself, which is the great hope that we have. I think back, I've said this many, many times, and if anybody is listening to this thing, they probably have heard it before, bored by my anecdote or story. But one of the great blessings in my life was that when I was young, I had a Russian tutor who had been a nurse with the White Russian Army of Admiral Kolchak against the Bolsheviks, who was one of 3 survivors of her family, who all of whom had been liquidated by the Bolsheviks. And she was a great, magnificent person who gave private Russian lessons in Atlanta. She had married an Atlanta doctor and had ended up here. But she was always serenely confident that Russia would no longer be communist someday. She unfortunately died. She would be very old. She died about 2 years before the collapse of communism. But she spoke of this very serenely and calmly, with great certitude, and not with some desperate vehemence of someone who wanted to go home. But when people would ask her, she would say, Russia will be non-communist, it will be free again. And the reason she would say is, things that don't work, don't work. And she said, the communist theory is contrary to God's law. It is contrary to human nature. It's contrary to natural law. It's contrary to everything we know about how people work. And she said, it's not working. Under the Tsar, we fed Europe. The communists have never been able to feed themselves. And she said, you can no more keep a government like that in power than you can build a skyscraper out of balsa wood. It doesn't matter how many architects you take out and shoot in the back of the head, and how much you claim that balsa wood is the supreme building material for skyscrapers, the skyscraper will fall down. And she said it's contrary to truth, and it will fall. And she was absolutely right about that. So our system will fall too. The question becomes, what do we do when it falls? How we replace it? We will not overthrow it. I know how they would love to make a conspiracy case out that on September 7th, Sam Dixon and Gordon, I forgot, and we all met and we planned a great conspiracy, an insurrection to overthrow the government. I don't have the slightest intent of doing the slightest thing to overthrow the government. I'm just glad that these awful people who misrule us are running the government into the ground, and that there will be a chance to create something better when this thing burns out. And it's going to burn out. They cannot keep this thing going.
And if people have been listening, they've heard me say a bunch of times, I've been listening to people older and wiser and smarter than me saying that the system's about to collapse since I was roughly 5 years old.
I have too, and I never believed it. I've told people most of my life. One of the great things in my life has been that a lot of people come to me for mentoring. I don't know why, but young people, and I've always told them, don't believe these collapse theories. Get married, have a family, buy a house. Don't believe all this talk you hear among the right wing that there's going to be a horrible revolution in 6 months and we'll all be killing each other in the streets over a sack of potato chips. Don't believe that stuff. And people who have believed it have ruined their lives. But I have come in old age to see that things are so out of hand now that it cannot survive.
Gordon, where do you stand on this?
Well, I completely agree with that. I think it will crumble under its own weight eventually. The system right now, if you look at it from a standpoint of the military, from criminal justice, from especially the economy, all of that is failing. All of that is terribly inadequate and insufficient to meet the needs of the constituents that it should be meeting, whether it's national security, with the flood and the invasion, if I can call it that, the real invasion. It's not a virtual invasion. It's a real invasion over our southern border. If you take just that under national security, your national security flies out the window. You no longer have an integral country which protects its citizens and protects its borders. That doesn't happen. That's not happening anymore. Economically, look at how the economy over the last several years has gone in the tank. Now you have every economist and his brother warning tomorrow's going to be the crash. Next week it's going to happen. Next month it's going to happen. Well, it's happening slowly but surely, where economically, whether it's the cost of gas, fossil fuels. Oh, I'm sorry. I hit, of course, that fossil fuels. My gosh, the price there, of course, has gone up, some artificially, because, of course, we all should be in electric vehicles by now. And they're leveraging the support that they get from the environmental crew. They're leveraging the support they get from the racial crew. They're leveraging the support they get from the Hispanics from the South. They leverage all of those groups against what now has become the white supremacists, the old white men, and they're even going against the current regime with that, even against somebody like Joe Biden, who's an old white man, or Donald Trump or anybody else. Well, maybe, as the media says, maybe we should be looking at somebody younger. Maybe it's time that we go to a different generation. Maybe it's time we go to another ethnic group. Maybe it's time we involve everybody in the country and stay away from these people. So it becomes what we used to call reverse discrimination, or a kind of a reverse racism. And racism, in my mind, in any context, is wrong. It's simply wrong. And whether it's white for black or black for white or whatever, what I told my guys when I took over my units in the military and when I took over a police department, I told them, I don't care what color you are. I don't care what race you are. I don't care what sex you are. I don't care what sex you like. What I care about is that you treat other people with respect. Everything you do, you can use force. I told my police officers, you can use force with respect. You can shoot somebody with respect, believe it or not. You can treat people with respect. And as long as we treat everybody with respect and with ultimate humanity, I believe that amplifies the fairness and impartiality doctrine that I keep hounding on. So I agree with what Sam has said. I do believe that the current system is going to self-destruct one way or another because it simply can't sustain itself in the current pathway.
I've got to ask this question. and you can both answer it. Is there any doubt that if someone is shot in the context of a fight, whoever started it, that is what he's talking about, shooting someone in self-respect? And this gets back to the McMichael Aubrey.
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Self-defense is respectful, and if you're involved in a fight, isn't that sort of the essence of what he just said? You can. He said he made this strange statement that many people would probably find very strange, that you can shoot someone with respect. Was Aubrey shot with respect?
No, I think it's just there's a desperate fight for a gun, and we don't know how the gun went off. We don't know if McMichaels wrested it away from him and shot him, or whether it discharged in the course of the fight, and then when it was pointing at him. So I don't think so.
A fair fight that ends up in death would be respectful.
Well, I think that kind of fight is usually an accident. Somebody slugs somebody and the guy falls down and hits his head on the curbside and dies as an accident, which is a terrible thing. That can then become a murder. But it can legitimately be charged with murder for that kind of thing. But no, I think that's a pretty theoretical question, and not one that I'm not able to answer or will not answer the right way.
Well, I mean, going back historically, I just think of Aaron Burr and Alexander Hamilton. A duel is an extremely respectful way of shooting each other.
Well, I don't think so. I don't think so. I mean, I can see immediately where that would lead. You would have the kind of people we have running the country today. People like the people that misrule us. They would go and get a hired killer who's a fabulous shot, quick with a draw, and then have him go challenge their enemy to a duel. And a duel, if somebody challenged me as a 77-year-old aged person saying, well, I want a duel with you, a fight to the death with knives, and this guy's 22 and all that, that's not fair. So I don't know. I'm not keen on duels. I think back to the death of Alexander Pushkin, the Russian poet, one of the 3 or 4 greatest poets in the history of the human race, who died at a young age in a duel over a woman. One of the things I'd like to do is get in a time machine and go back and stop that duel and tell the other officer and tell Pushkin it's not worth a duel over a woman to kill Russia's greatest poet in the history of her literature at age 33. It's just not a good idea. So
you define shooting with respect for me.
I can't.
Well, and since I'm the one that brought it up, let me give a bit of a context and clarification for that. I believe that police officers can use force with respect. In other words, I can point a gun at somebody and say, "Yo, MFer, drop the effing gun right now, or I will effing shoot your ass," type of thing. Now, that, to me, the physical use of force may be perfectly justified, but the verbiage that goes along with it makes it very disrespectful. I can do the same thing, accomplish the same thing. I'm a firm believer that pointing a gun at somebody is pretty well understandable in any language. I think they understand that if I point a gun at them and say, stop, alto, whatever, they know what it is that I want them to do. There's nothing wrong with saying, stop. If you go for the gun, I will shoot you. No MFer, no effing this, no effing that. And I've had police officers tell me, well, you've got to speak their language. They understand that. I said, okay. So you mean to tell me that if I point a gun at somebody and tell them to stop and drop the gun, that they won't understand that? Well, maybe they don't know that you're sincere. Believe me, they will know I'm sincere. Everyone has in 35 years. So even shooting somebody, the issue here, the context is self-defense. I can't speak to the McMichael out of the video scenario because I don't know. But if I were attacked as a police officer, I were attacked by somebody who's going for my gun, and I end up grabbing my gun and shooting them in order to stop the attack against me. Saying, hey, sir, I'm sorry about that. You came at me. You decided this was going to happen. I didn't make this happen. You did. That's the type of use of force with respect, to include shooting somebody with respect, that I'm talking about. I hope that clarifies that a bit.
I think it does, but uh, human nature being what it is, when people, even policemen, get excited, they tend to resort to, shall we say, vernacular, and I don't know. I don't know if it makes it more or less respectful to use words that I don't normally use. I won't say. I'm not going to lie and say I've never used them, but I was raised in a family where I could end up with my head smashed against the wall if I use those words. And I don't know. It's a fascinating thing, because violence is the ultimate test of authority. Another one, going back to my anthropological background, there's a definition of the state that is, the state has a monopoly on the legitimate use of violence, and that is the definition of a state-level society. That means, for example, that the Vikings and the American Indians, 90% of the American Indians, never had a state, because everyone retained the right to be violent. Not merely the right, but sort of the definition of manliness to be violent. And Paul and Sam just a few minutes ago was quoting a member of the British Parliament in the 19th century, say, "Are there no red-blooded Englishmen left who will enforce the law?" That implication is violent, and you don't have to. If you're a shop owner who's being robbed, and you don't need a badge to pull out your gun or sword or whatever and arrest a robber, or even under the old law, kill a robber, is that respectful? Is that decent? Is that moral?
Well, there's several levels to that, Charles. The morality, the ethical framework, the honesty, integrity. But from your human nature standpoint, it's a slippery slope to emotion. And in emotion comes anger. And a police officer, and I would stipulate or submit that the state does not have the right, does not have the ability to use anger in determining violence or the application of the law. The police officers that I used to supervise, I would tell them, if you're angry about a situation, you need to get out of it. You need to back out. And I've done that. Of situations, I had a case where I had 3 SIDS deaths in 1 week as a police officer. The third one was a case of a morbidly obese mother which rolled over on her baby and killed him, and then tried to portray it as a SIDS death. It was my third one of the week. I went into it with a number of other officers, and it was obvious from the beginning what was happening. And I excused myself. I got out of there because I started to well up in anger, and I was going to make an emotional decision rather than an intellectual decision. And as I tell my police officers, my investigators, everybody, if you're working from the emotional side of your brain, making decisions there instead of the intellectual side, then you have no business being in the transaction that you're involved in.
I think we've reached an amazing point at the end of this section in terms of my goal of discussing legal realism and the interaction of law with psychology and presentation, because you just said something amazing. You said that the state has no right to invoke anger. The state does nothing but invoke anger, I would submit. I would submit that when we go to war, we insist that our population be angry, and we basically justify sending potentially millions of people to death based on emotion. That is one of the most key features of state level society. And we're talking the 20th century. I mean, for 30, 40 years after World War II, Studs Terkel has to write a book called The Good War about how World War II was so damn good because we were killing Nazis. A movie that came out about 10 years ago, I forget which one it was, said Django Unchained. One of the actors said, it's about killing white men. I love it. I mean, that became a legitimate concept, that to hate is to exercise power justly. And this is a really interesting thing because it relates to almost everything that we're talking about. People hate Donald Trump. People hate Donald Trump. Trump has, in all fairness, he attempted to invoke hatred of Hillary Clinton. I think that everyone assumed that it simply was not even worthwhile hating Joe Biden because he was nobody. He was in his basement for most of the campaign. Why bother to hate a man who wasn't even campaigning? But that's a factor in politics. Sam, am I wrong?
Well, I think the average man has a hard time controlling himself. I think there's only a small minority of people who can be in control of themselves and be composed under stress. It's kind of an ideal of Englishmen to be that way, to be cool and calm and collected. A lot of cultures and groups do not have that. But it's appalling to see what masses of people will fall to. You're familiar, I'm sure, with Gustave Le Bon and his book The Crowd, and how mobs think or don't think. And people as a group are worse than people as individuals. The whole is worse than the parts. And you look back, you talk about movies. One of the most shocking movies I've ever seen, which forever changed my opinion of Brad Pitt, was Inglourious Bastards. Did either of you ever see that?
No.
Well, it was about 10 years ago, and I saw it, and the audience of Americans were just thrilled with it. They're cheering and clapping and laughing, but it depicts approvingly American soldiers torturing prisoners of war. in World War II. You would, I doubt that Goebbels' cinema in Germany ever distributed a movie to the German masses glorying in pictures of German soldiers in uniform torturing other soldiers in uniform. But the morals of our country are so bad. They're indescribably bad. They're so bad that people don't even realize how bad it is. They've lost all concept of how decent people behave, and that it is a terrible blot on the escutcheon of our country to have movies glorifying soldiers who violate the Geneva Convention and torture prisoners. But anyway, that's what we have to work with.
And yet, World War I, well, the Spanish-American War was about hating Spain. Remember the Maine. World War I, the English, the English you're talking about, who idealized the whole keep calm and carry on business. In World War I, they made up phenomenal stories about German soldiers putting Belgian babies on bayonets and poking out babies' eyes. They made out phenomenal stories to arouse hatred and violence to a group of people who, at the first Christmas in the trenches, they had, some of them celebrated the voluntary truce and sang Christmas carols and exchanged smokes, because that was how the common people felt between Britain and Germany in 1940.
When people hate somebody, lawyers understand this when they choose juries, that prejudice will control the credibility given to evidence. If you hate somebody, you will receive, if a juror hates somebody, the juror will receive improbable evidence and give it great credibility if it's to the detriment of the person, the litigant he hates, and vice versa. And you see this all the time. In the smear on me that the Southern Poverty Law Center has maintained on its website now for 15 years, a smear that is factually false. I'm not talking about calling somebody a white supremacist or racist or anything that's protected by the First Amendment. I'm talking about flat out lies about facts. That smear advances the idea that I routinely call black people with the N-word in business negotiations. Anybody that William says that I cannot have black people on free business.
Looks like we're out of time, and we are ending with a very is hatred legitimate? Is hatred part of the war? And I think it is. And that's legal realism, that with a capital R, that we've got to deal with. Thank you, gentlemen, very much. Thank you for your report. Thank you, Patrick. We should continue. Good night, everybody.
Good night, Sam, Charles. Good night.
You're sailing into the darkness of my dust. Good night from New Orleans, everybody. Thank you for watching.